Hello everyone and welcome to the first week of web programming. So I've talked about these things already in course overviews and such, but we start off with some PHP stuff that we didn't get to in Introduction to PHP. So they're kind of introductory-ish topics. First couple weeks we'll talk about arrays, functions, and objects, which are kind of at the fringe of what we got into in the first course. This entire course isn't going to be PHP, but we start off with PHP. The main idea behind that is that sometimes there's people that didn't go straight from the first PHP class to this, and they need a review, and it also just helps to solidify those PHP fundamentals, because we're going to be using it throughout the course, and we will get away from PHP as we get going. I just feel like I need to mention that a little bit, because I think a lot of you are going to find JavaScript to be a refreshing change of direction, and that's kind of where we go. And we start doing some more interesting stuff later on, but in the beginning, PHP. So this week we're going to talk about arrays and functions. Now those are things that we already have talked about, but we haven't exactly got into them and just talked about those things by themselves. So arrays. You've used arrays. You can't really get very far in PHP without arrays. An array is a single memory location used to store multiple values. Like, for example, let's say you had a bunch of students, 30 of them. You could make 30 variables, student 1, student 2, student 3, student 4. And you could do that. That would be one way to store the information, but then it gets difficult to manage. Like, you can't iterate over that because each one of them is a separate thing. Or you could make a singular array with 30 positions. It's kind of similar in terms of what it does functionally, but the way you write it out is different. So when you see square bracket notation, that means you are talking about arrays. Now, you've already used arrays. Just up to this point, we haven't really created them. We've just kind of used them. So the idea is we're going to talk a little bit more about what they are and why. So the thing in the square brackets is the key or the index. It kind of depends. There's two kinds of arrays. There's associative arrays and there's indexed arrays. Most arrays are indexed, meaning that the positions are numbered 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And associative arrays are when the key has a name, like key 1 or key 2. That's kind of a bad example. A better example would be a key name like F name or L name. You are familiar with those because you deal with them in the context of those superglobal arrays all the time, like get and post and server. So you've used those, but you just haven't really created them much. So associative arrays have named keys, and indexed arrays have indexes. Indexed arrays are the more common one, but in PHP, you know that we use the associatives quite a bit. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of them. So if you ever want to create an array, there's actually a bunch of ways to do it in PHP. You're not actually going to create that many arrays. It's more like you're going to have to deal with them. You might need to create a few on occasion, but more often than not, the data is just going to be in an array, and you're going to have to know how to manipulate it. So this is one way to create an array. So I've got some variable called array. Notice I don't specify that it's an array. Normally the giveaway about an array is these square brackets right here, but if you're just declaring an array, you don't need to. And then you call this is a constructor right here. We'll talk about those next week when we talk about objects, but this right here would create an array with 3 positions, and the first position would be Ken, second would be Greg, next one would be Paul. The positions in that array are 0, 1, and 2, so arrays are 0 indexed. Now that is, if you haven't sat and talked about arrays before, that's going to be a new concept to you. What you should do is think about strings. Strings are 0 indexed. Like, meaning, in the string dog, the D is in position 0, the O is in position 1, the G is in position 2. Now, where you can get in trouble with these things, let's just talk about strings for a minute. On a related note, strings are arrays of characters. All right. Moving past that. So, like the string dog has a length of 3, but there's no position 3. That's because things are 0 indexed. When we talk about length of something, we start at 1, right? Like a length of 1 is 1, but the first character is in spot 0. Is that confusing? I don't know. Maybe. I'm trying to not make it confusing, but it might be confusing. All right, so when you declare an array, they are 0 indexed. You're going to get in trouble if you ever go to the spot that is the length of the thing, because that is going to be 1 past it. I hope that makes sense. I don't know. This is a common thing as well. So if you just want to push something onto the end of an array, you can do it like this. So just like array, or whatever the name of your array is, empty square brackets, give it a value. That is going to push Frank onto the end of that array. Yeah, I know my phone just made that sound. I'm going to leave that in. All right, so that is how you can work with. And so we're talking about indexed arrays right now. Notice we're not specifying anything about the index positions. We're just pushing them into the array, and they go where they go. Sure, Frank is going to be the fourth thing in there, which is actually spot 3, but we don't really care, right? They're just these kind of arbitrary numbers. We just need to understand that it starts in spot 0. Associative arrays. Oh, yeah, I also have allergies this time of year, so these, you're going to hear that, and I'm sorry. I don't know what I can do about it. So associative arrays have, instead of keys that are numbers like 0 and 1 and 2, they have keys like fname and lname. You've seen these before. You are definitely familiar with the superglobal arrays like $_get, $_post, session, cookie, server. Those are all superglobals that we've used, and those are all associative arrays, meaning that the keys, you need to know what the keys are called. So they're kind of hard to work with in that, like, if you don't know the names of the keys, files was another good one that we messed with, then you can't do anything with them. But if once you know the names of the keys, then you can do what you want. As opposed to an indexed array, where you don't need to know the name of the keys, you just go through it and see if you can find what you're looking for, is usually how that goes. So if you ever want to create an associative array, this is what it looks like. You notice you're calling that array function again. It's a constructor. A constructor is a function that you use to set up an object, which is what this is underneath the hood. That'll make more sense soon enough. But notice this kind of weird, I don't know, I guess it's weird syntax. It's kind of common, but it's also weird the first time you see it. This is saying, hey, I'm going to create an array called ASOC. The first key is going to be fname. And I said first key. It's not really the first key. It's just a key named fname is going to be a value of Peter. And there's going to be a key called lname with last name of Griffin. That's not really the first key. It's an associative array. So, I mean, when I was initializing this thing, I guess that's the first one, but it's not, position's not important. What's important is the name of them. So at this point, hopefully you understand the difference between an associative array and an indexed array. There's a time and a place for both. You probably don't have a ton of experience with arrays if you're a typical student. You've just used those associative arrays a lot. I'm telling you the indexed arrays are very common. You just haven't had to cross paths with them a lot, but out in the real world, you will run into them a lot. All right, so that's kind of how that goes. Trust me, I'm not going to sit here just talking all the time. I've got a bunch of examples that we're going to get into shortly. So let's talk about displaying array contents. So arrays are complicated. It doesn't just have one thing in it. It should have more than one thing in it. If it only had one value in it, you probably should just be using a variable. So you can try and echo out an array, but it doesn't work. It's going to give you some error saying something like can't be converted to a string. Don't worry, example's coming. Print R, that's an underscore. Sorry, I guess I should turn off spell check or something like that, but that's print underscore R. That's the function used for printing arrays, pretty much. There's also these pre-tags that you're going to want to use to make things even easier to read. Those pre-tags are HTML tags. I'll show you an example. They just make line breaks happen. So print R is your best friend when you want to display the contents of an array. You would only want to display the contents of an array for debugging and development purposes, but it is a valuable tool, so do remember that. Another one you can use is vardump. Vardump gives you more information, but it's probably not, you probably don't need it. It's like all the information it could possibly tell you about the thing that you're trying to display. And there's those pre-tags. Let's look at an example. All right. So here's an associative array, right? It's called R1. Its keys are 1, 2, and fname. Weird. Okay, that's what I'm going for. And so 1 has a value of Ken, 2 has a value of Kelly, and fname has a value of Jamie, right? So that's an associative array. That's creating an associative array right there. You notice I use that array constructor with that pointer, like the equal and the angle bracket notation in the PowerPoint. You can do it this way too. Here's an indexed array where I assign them based on positions as opposed to names. This is using that constructor, right? This does the same thing as that kind of sort of. So Ken is going to go into spot 0, Kelly's going to go into spot 1, and Kendrell is going to go into spot 2. Yeah, I don't know what that is. I mean, I don't know, Kendrell, Carrywinkle. I don't know what I'm doing. And this right here is pushing an element onto the end of that array. So you notice there's a lot of flexibility in the way that you do these things. There's not a way to do it. There's a lot of ways to do it. And I'll reiterate what I've said a few times already, and that is that you're not necessarily going to create a lot of arrays in the first place. You're probably going to deal with them more than create them. At this point, this video's already gone 10 minutes. This is the lecture for the week. I know this is long. I know when I created these examples, this was going to go for a while, but it's a lecture. I got to get through it, and I'm going to try and do the best job I can. This is in lieu of a face-to-face class, so I do feel kind of bad about it. Anyways, that's what syntax looks like. But the interesting thing is, the reason I didn't go straight to those, normally I try and write more code and talk less. But none of this produces anything printable, so it's not really much of a demonstration. This is where the demonstration starts. So I'm saying echo R1, that thing. All right, so some of you probably know where this is going already. It's going somewhere like this. So the first thing it says, notice array to string conversion. And that's what I was describing. You cannot echo out an array. Echo is for echoing out a string. You can echo out an integer, but that integer gets converted to a string. You can't convert an array to a string because you've got those keys and values, and it's not clear what you'd actually want to do. So I guess that was just a bad idea, so I'm just going to comment that out. And instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a print R on it, right, which is the correct tool for it. And the print R is going to do that right there. You see, so it says it's an array, index position, name 1. It's confusing, right? I kind of regret this. I thought it was funny to do 1 like as a word. But now I'm realizing when I say it out loud, there's no difference between the string 1 and the number 1. But anyways, 1 is Ken, 2 is Kelly, and F name is Jamie. So you can see it went the way that I expected it to go. That's pretty readable. Right below that, I have a var dump on the same thing. So let's contrast what a var dump looks like versus that. I don't need to refresh. So here's the print R. That probably tells me everything I need to know. See, the var dump is just more. The var dump is saying it's an array with 3 positions. Key 1 has a string of length 3, and that value's Ken. Do you see how it's telling me more about like the data types and the lengths of them? I can't think of a lot of good examples where I needed to do a var dump versus a print R. Sometimes you expect these things to be integers or floats or something like that, and it ends up being a string. So sometimes that can be helpful, but probably not. I don't do many var dumps. I'm going to do a lot of print Rs. All right, so you can see print R is probably the better tool. Var dump has a place and a time. Now, the other thing I mentioned was these pre-tags. So pre-tags are HTML tags. They're container tags. They look like that. So I open and I close around it, and I'll show you what that looks like. That looks like that, which gave us absolutely no value at all. So it didn't do a whole lot for us here, but when you have a nested array, it gets to be a huge mess. So like imagine that that value right there is another array. It gets to be terrible to look at, but when your arrays get complex, wrapping them in pre-tags is a good idea. All right, so I'm going to comment that stuff out now because it's kind of a mess. Is this going to work? I guess that works. I'm always a little nervous about just doing those big block comment things because sometimes they don't work out quite right, but it looks like it did. The next topic's going to be superglobals. And we will get there in about 2 or 3 slides. So, quick question. Given the following array, what value is in position 2? I don't know. Should I sit here and make you answer it? So that's spot 0, that's spot 1, that's spot 2. The answer is going to be Lenny. Right? The naive approach would be that, because that's the second thing. But remember, these things are 0 indexed. And which position stores Fred? Naive answer would be 2, because it's the second thing. However, it's 0, 1. So that's going to be position 1. So if you're just following this and you get the whole 0 index thing, then you're in pretty good shape. All right. Another syntax for working with arrays. So this right here in version 5.4 forward, which we're well past, This is yet another syntax for creating arrays. This would create an indexed array with position 0 having a 1, position 1 having a 2, and position 2 having a 3. That's confusing to say, but I hope you understand what I said. So yet another way to initialize arrays. On the subject of arrays, we should talk about superglobals. Superglobals. You have a lot of experience with these. This is how we process the information we get from forms. And this is how we work with sessions, and this is how we work with cookies, and this is how we do that server PHP self. Some of you do that, some of you don't. Superglobals are arrays that they're omnipresent. They're always there. Whether you use them or not is up to you, but get and post are always there. Their get might be empty and post might be empty, but they are always there. Just like you can use these or not. But those are good examples of associative arrays because you need to know the names of the keys. If you don't know the names of the keys, these aren't going to do you any good. Server is also a good one. Let's do a few more notes on servers. On server, so there's a lot of stuff in server. The one that we use the most is PHP self. That is a reference to the name of the file that is currently being run. So where we use that is on the actions of our forms. But, it doesn't do anything. You can't hard code in there, but, I like to do that. There's reasons for doing that. Server name, that returns the name of the host server. Remote address, that returns the IP address of the user viewing the page. Now, that information in that server file, that's not exactly the most reliable stuff in the world, but there are some things in there that you can use to try to implement things. All right, superglobals. All right, so I'll show you some superglobal stuff. So let's say I'll do a print R on $_get. Now, you see my example. You know perfectly well, do I need this? That there's not going to be anything in it. It's that. I know. See, the problem here is that I don't have line breaks by default, and it's super annoying. It gave me that. That's what I got. And I got that because there's nothing in get right now. Just like there's nothing in, I don't think there's going to be anything in session either. You never know. Sessions have they might be, well, I don't have session start, so I couldn't get away with that. Post is going to be empty. Right? My point being, they're there, right? Like I didn't get a error for trying to reference it. It's just empty. I did get an error on session because I don't have session start at the top of the page. But server is never going to be empty. And really, since I'm just running this locally, it's just going to tell me about my XAMPP installation, kind of, sort of. That is an example of something that you would want to do with pre-tags around it. Let me wrap that thing in pre-tags. I feel really bad about these long videos, but I also know that I've kind of got a lot of content to cover, so I don't know how much any of this is avoidable. So see this mess? You wrap it in pre-tags, and it looks like that. Now you're like, oh, okay, I get it. So in some instances, the pre-tags are overkill because they don't really do anything. But if things are complicated, those pre-tags are going to be helpful. All right, so that's superglobals. You know about superglobals. You're not going to create superglobals, but you're going to use them, and you already have used them. Next up, array functions. So there's a whole world of array functions. I am not trying to cover all array functions, but these are some array functions. These are the ones that I use more than others, I guess. So, like one array function is count. That'll tell you how many things are in an array. That's very useful because when you get an array handed to you, you don't know how many things are in it, usually. Well, I mean, you should know that there's a function which will tell you how many things are there. There's a max, there's a min. These things don't work the way you think they do. They work fine for numbers, but for strings they don't work. Sort and reverse sort. These are not common ones. I don't think I've ever actually used these, but they're interesting, so I want to talk about them. Notice the little asterisk saying they're destructive functions. So if you call the sort function on an array, it sorts it in ascending order. And it's called destructive because it reorders the stuff in the array. There's no way to undo it. Once you call that function, you're never going to get the old array back. Which kind of gets to a question, why would you want to get the old array back? I don't think you would. I deal with this in classes where I teach Excel and we do a lot of sorting of data. People say, oh, how do you unsort it? And I usually say, well, there's not an unsort button because you don't need to unsort it. Why would you want it unsorted? I mean, if it's unsorted, that's probably fine. There's a lot of instances where it doesn't matter if it's sorted or not. But it's never worse when it's sorted. Yeah, so you can't turn back the clock. You can't get it back to an unsorted mess. But I fail to see what problems that's going to cause unless we're representing something like a queue or a stack. But let's not talk about those things right now. So do understand that those are destructive functions, and I'll demo them a little bit. This is a very useful one. In array, this is a search function. So when I say it's a Boolean function, it returns true or false based on whether it finds that value in that array. So that's a search. That's really useful. Implode and explode, believe it or not, you will use those on occasion. They have horrible names, I think. So implode is used to take an array and rip it apart and turn it into a string. And explode is used to take a string and rip it apart and turn it into an array. The thing that's difficult about these, I think, is this separator. So let's say you got an array full of numbers. You wouldn't want to just turn that into a string because it would just be some big mass of numbers. There wouldn't be spaces or commas between them. So that's what that separator is going to be. That separator is usually going to be something like a comma and a space, or a space and a hyphen and a space. That's what a separator is, because otherwise it's just going to mash them together like a big old concatenate, and it's going to be a mess. Explode is kind of similar. Explode, this is probably going to be something like a comma, and this is going to be the string that you want to split into an array. Now these are hard to just talk about, so I've got some examples, so let's look at those. Take this. I'm just commenting things out so you don't have to look at more than you have to look at. So we're going to look at the count of R2. Here's R2. It should have 3 things in it. And has 3 things in it. What's the max of R2? Now that's a good question, right? I don't know what people would guess. I don't know, maybe carry because it's at the end or something. Well, it is at the end. I'm telling you that's not how that works, though. So max and min only make sense with numbers. Otherwise, it's going to be based on ASCII values, which really means alphabetical order. So carry just happens, this is an interesting one because they all start with K and then have an E. R just comes latest in the alphabet. And you'll see when I do the min, I'm horrible at L, M, N. So Kelly should be the minimum. You see how that works. So notice that max and min isn't doing what you would want it to do with strings, but, well, I don't know, maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but it's more intended for numbers. And so let me move on this. Well, yeah, okay, I will. See, I'm canning these coding examples. I'm trying to make this as short as I can, but I'm also trying to be some kind of thorough. So the next thing that I want to do is show you a sort example. You'll see we're going through explode and implode. So I'm going to print out array 1, and then I'm going to sort array 1, and then I'm going to print it again. So you notice that just simply calling this function is going to change it. Well, you'll see that. So here's the array unsorted. It's Ken, Kelly, Jamie. And then I call that sort function, and it turns into Jamie, Kelly, Ken. What I'm trying to illustrate here is, one, just calling that function did sort it, but you see that it's gone forever. My old one, that array, once I call that function, that array's different. And that's okay. I don't know why you would want it to be unsorted. Well, I do, but in most instances, you don't want to do that. All right, so how about implode and explode? All right, so just to remind you what those do. So implode is going to take an array and it's going to turn it into a string. So let me get rid of these sort examples. And so we're going to implode array 2. Array 2 is the one with Ken, Kelly, Carrie. And so I'm going to implode it. This looks super weird right here. Those quotation marks are indicating this is a string. It's a comma and a space. So what I'm saying is, here's this array. I want you to grab all the values, concatenate them together in one string, and separate them with a comma and a space. And that's going to be called string, and I'm going to print out my string. And I'll show you what that looks like. It does that, right? So it grabbed the values, and it concatenated them together with a comma and a space. It's a weird demo, but that's also, I don't know what else I would possibly do for that. And then down here, I'm saying array 4, so I'm declaring a new array, and I'm saying that array is going to be the product of exploding that string we just made, and go and so when picking through this string, you know that you've reached the end of a value because you find a comma and a space, right? So that same character I used to separate them in the string is the same character I'm going to use to separate them when I turn them back into an array. I don't know if I said that right or not. So I'm making this new array here. I'm attempting to print it here, which isn't going to work, I assume. Array to string conversion. I'm just trying to illustrate that point again. The reason you can't print that out is because it's an array. Whereas notice here, I could print it out because it was a string. And then I do a print R on it, and you'll see the print R is not very interesting. That's that print R. As you can see, it took that string and it turned it into an array. So spot 0 was Ken, spot 1 was Kelly, spot 2 was Carrie. So that got converted into an array. Of all the things I'm trying to demonstrate today, I think that's probably the roughest one. But hopefully you got something out of that. So explode and implode, those aren't things I use all the time, but sometimes you need them. You'll be surprised. Sometimes those could end up being the solution to the problem. I didn't demonstrate in array. That's actually the one you're going to get the most use out of. There's quite a few more functions for arrays. Arrays are complicated things meant to make programming easier. So if there's something that you're thinking you'd want to do to an array that maybe someone else has come up with a solution to before, there's a good chance that it already exists and it's probably already included in the PHP language. So I would head over to php.net and go search around and see if you can find a function to do what you want it to do. All right, that concludes arrays. So we spent about 30 minutes talking about that. I don't feel too bad about that. I kind of do, because this is going to be a long video, but I don't know, 28 minutes on arrays? I can live with it. All right, next up, talking about decision structures. So if, else, else if, you know about these. It's a prerequisite to this course. If you're not familiar with ifs and elses and decision structures, this is probably not the right place to start. I mention this because these videos are going to be, I put them public on the internet. So if you don't know about ifs and elses, you're kind of in over your head at this point. All right, so the most common kind of structure of these is just an if with an else. If you got multiple cases, like a bunch of else ifs, I can't really help you. So here's an if. So if x is equal to 0, echo something else, echo something else. Notice there's no curly braces here. I'm one of those folks that does this like every time because I like to illustrate the scope of things. I think it's really important. But I also want to make the point that if what you're doing is a simple one-line thing, which it often is, then you don't actually need curly braces. But if you have 2 lines here, you're going to get a blow up if you don't have curly braces. So the curly braces are kind of optional if all you're doing is one line. I don't actually want to talk about else if. What I want to talk about is the ternary operator. So the ternary operator is an operator. It's in most languages. It is shorthand for a simple if-else statement. Right? Like this thing here is simple enough that it didn't even need curly braces. So here's what a ternary operator looks like. So the part I'm highlighting with my cursor is the ternary operator. That right there is an assignment statement, so don't worry about that. So basically, in reading this is my conditional statement. That is the same as saying if age is equal to 21. So a ternary operator replaces a simple else-if structure, or if-else. So notice we don't write the word if. This is that condition, though. And then we write a question mark. And then this is what happens if it's true. And this is what happens if it's false. That is a colon, not a semicolon. That is a semicolon, right? I mean, talking about confusing, we got a colon and a semicolon in the same sentence, but semicolon ends a statement. The colon means it's part of a ternary operator. So the weird stuff here is my conditional statement is wrapped in parentheses, followed by a question mark. That's the true, that's the false. It's a colon that separates them. This right here is just saying that I've got some variable called output, and I'm assigning it the value of whatever this ternary produces. So this is just taking that if-else, and it's turning it into a one-line statement. You don't have to like these. I don't use a lot of these. I certainly don't use them as a teacher because it's not the easiest thing to read. I try and write the most verbose, like easy to follow code that I can, and this is the opposite of that. But it's also an elegant solution to a simple if, which is, I mean, it's kind of tedious sometimes to write 3 lines for something so simple. On the assignment this week, I'm going to make you use a ternary operator. But going forward, I'm not going to make you use these. But you should know what they are because you're going to run across them. That said, let's see an example. Oh, good. I already commented it out. I'm just blowing up with emails this morning because it's coronavirus, right? I mean, I get like an update every hour. So, and there's nothing I can do about that. All right, so here's an example of a ternary operator. So, x equals 7. That has nothing to do with it. I just need a variable to make this work. So, right there, that's my conditional statement. So I'm saying, is x equal to 7? If it is, then print out yes. Otherwise, print out not 7. That's a ternary. So I would expect this thing to spit out a yes. I know it does because I saw it sitting there a minute ago. Yes. Make that an 8. I'm going to get a not 7. A lot of what we write in programming is an if-else. I mean, but right, if there's an else-if, this isn't the right tool. But a lot of what we do is if-else, and if you want to do this, you can. Now, I'm trying to think, what can I do to make this a little more productive? You notice how I've got an echo in front of it? So this thing right here, it produces something, but you need to do something with it. Like if I don't have an echo, then it's just going to be a ternary, and nothing's going to happen. It's going to evaluate to yes, but it's not going to get printed out anywhere. Which is, I don't know, something. So you'll notice that I keep putting things on the left-hand side here. So you're going to either need to echo this out or do some kind of an assignment statement like, why. Right? You got to do something with it. Just calling a ternary operator doesn't do anything at all. So that's use of a ternary operator. As I said, I don't use them a ton, but sometimes you write if-elses that are so simple that it might be something you want to do. All right, so that was kind of the odd duck topic for the lecture. Next, we're going to talk about ForEach loops. So this is related to arrays. So a ForEach loop is similar to a for loop. A for loop, if you recall, is a loop where you don't have to explicitly mess around with the counter. It's that idea of understanding that loops generally start at 0 and they go to the, to the end of something. If you don't want to deal with creating a counter and incrementing the counter, you can use a for loop instead of a while loop. Well, a ForEach loop is a specialized kind of a for loop. It is used to iterate over an array or an object. So I will show you an example of that soon enough. But like an array, for an example, an array is 0 indexed. More often than not, you're going to start at position 0 and you're going to go to whatever the size is, -1. So if there's 50 things in an array, you're going to start in spot 0 and you're going to go to spot 49. It's easy enough to write a while loop for that, but there's also a structure called a ForEach loop, and a ForEach is going to start at the beginning and it's going to go to the end, and you don't have to worry about counters or lengths or anything like that. Here's kind of what your syntax looks like. So it's ForEach, right? Similar to a for, but it's ForEach. That is the thing that you're going to iterate over, and that right there. And so this is the name of a variable's the wrong term because it needs to be a complex thing like an object or an array. And that right there, you could make up. I oftentimes write val because I'm lazy. You can write value, but you can call this whatever you want. This is going to be the values. and then there's my curly braces. I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so let's say we want to iterate over array 3, which is the one with Ken, Kelly, Kendrell, and Carrywinkle. It's got 4 things in it. So this for each right here, so that's the name of the array that I'm iterating over. Val, that means so for every key value pair, the keys are going to be like 0, 1, 2, 3. The values are going to be things like Ken and Carrywinkle. So Ken is going to be the first val for the first pass through the array. And then on the second pass, I think Carry is going to be the second one. So this is like a temporary variable which represents the value of the current index position. And then so all I'm doing is I'm going through the array and I'm spitting out every value with a line break, and then I go and get the next one like that. So you'll see what this does. You see what it did, right? It got the value, line break, value, line break, value, line break, value, line break. This is the same thing as a while loop that would look, okay, so just to show you kind of the upside here, I could have if I'm going to iterate through an array, I know that I'm going to start at 0, and I'll say while I is less than count of R3. I have to increment my counter. Oops, not that guy, that guy. And then I'm echoing out the values. So I'd have to say R3 spot I. This is a very common thing to do. Oh, I also need a line break on that. I think that will do the same thing. I think so. I wrote it quick. And you see, same thing. So that and that are the same thing. So if you think about iterating through an indexed array, you're going to start in spot 0 and you're going to go to the end. So if you want to skip that part, and that part, and that part, well, for each is going to be a good tool for that. Also notice that I have to do some kind of nasty concatenation when I am using a while loop, and I'm not allowed to do that because you're not allowed to index into an array, so I would have to wrap that in curly braces. But notice the point I'm trying to make here is I have to do some kind of concatenation if I'm going to print out the results with a while loop, whereas here, since I'm just going straight for the value, I can do it in a good old-fashioned echo. So for eaches are definitely helpful for arrays. A lot of time when I teach you something, I say, oh, I don't know if you're going to use this or not, like a ternary operator or a for loop as opposed to a while. But a for each really does make your life easier, so I'm kind of a fan of those. All right, so here's the rub, though. So at this point, you should probably be pretty excited about these. Like, oh, that's cool. I like that. There's another usage of for each loops. So in an indexed array, you don't care what the keys are. They don't represent anything. They're just positions, like 1 and 2. In an associative array, you probably actually care about the keys, like fname and lname, right? The keys give context to the values. So if you want to get the keys and the values, this is what your syntax looks like. So same thing, this is the name of my array, as, that's the key, and then that operator again, and then that's the value. So in this scenario here, you can reference the key and the value. So if you care about the keys, which pretty much means you're talking about an associative array, you can use this for an indexed array. You could say like 0 is Ken, 1 is Carry, but I don't think you probably care much. Whereas in an associative array, you certainly care about the keys. So a little more complicated, and that works out like this. You see, I'm almost done, so I guess that's good. So here's what it looks like when you're iterating through an associative array. So remember this was an associative array with my weird keys like 1, 2, and fname. So here I'm saying for each, here's the name of the array, as, and there's key and there's val, and I'm echoing out the key, colon, val. So I'm making a reference to both the keys and the values. Let me save that. Oops, what the heck was that? I don't know. Looks like I got a bunch of baseball games going. Anyways, 1 Ken, 2 Kelly, F name Jamie. So you see, if you want to get the keys and the values out of it, you got to go with that slightly more complex syntax. But that's ForEach loops. They are going to be your friend. You're going to be using a lot of arrays in this class, so remember, ForEaches can make your life easier. But you saw, on the other hand, I did write a while loop. It took me, what, 2 minutes? It's just a little more mistake prone. All right, and our lecture concludes with functions. Now, I only have 2 slides on functions because we're doing a lab on functions and an assignment on functions, and functions aren't a new thing. We did some functions in 133p. I'm just trying to hammer on them a little bit more here because, as you can already see, we're advancing past the... we're still in the building blocks of the language, but we're beyond the very introductory stuff. So, higher expectations for functions. So here's the syntax for functions in PHP. So, keyword function. That indicates that I'm declaring a function. This is the name of your function. Right? Every function needs a name. It should be descriptive. These are the parameters of your function. In other words, the things that you need to pass this function to make it do its job. And then you got a set of curly braces, which are going to define the scope of it. A function may or may not have a return statement. I'm really not trying to do a bunch of examples of these because I knew this was going to be a long PowerPoint. And we're going to sit here and do a lab shortly, which is going to be a whole bunch of examples of functions. So I'm just trying to go over the basic syntax here. So a function might not have a return statement. I don't know what the statistics are. Some of them have, I don't know, most of them return something. Some of them don't. I don't know if it's 50-50 or what, but there's a lot of them that don't return anything. I will tell you that if you do not have a return statement, it's the same thing as saying return 0. So even if you don't define a return, it's going to return 0 or false. So I guess that's worth knowing. And in order for a function to do something, you have to call it. Calling a function looks like this. So name of the function, parentheses, and pass it whatever you're passing it. Right? That would mean I'm calling some function called some function, and I'm passing it a 7. And that needs to match up with that. I'm not trying to introduce functions. I know you have experience with these, but I'm trying to remind you what the syntax looks like in PHP. And another term that we use this week is helper functions. Helper functions is just a made-up name for functions that you find to be helpful. The idea here is that if you're a programmer, let's say you're doing PHP every day and there's some tasks that you find repetitive and that you're doing a lot of, you might want to ask yourself, can I make a function out of this? And that function might serve to create reusable pieces of code as opposed to just copying and pasting the same stuff every time. If you find yourself copying and pasting your code, that usually is a giveaway that you probably should consider making a function out of the thing. And sometimes it's too difficult to make a generalized function, but you should think about it. So like, for example, examples of helper function. A function to print an array in a more readable format. So like, imagine if we created a function where you pass it an array and it echoes out the array wrapped in pre-tags with a print R. And hopefully that made sense, right? That's a common thing, and it's, if you get sick of writing pre-tags and print R, you can make a function out of it. Or a function that validates an email, right? So you pass it a string, and it returns true or false based on whether that email looks valid or not. Or a function that formats text as a heading. So I don't know what that function would look like. You'd probably pass it a string, and it would maybe return it wrapped in H1 tags. Those are examples of helper functions. They're very generalized things to just help you with your productivity on a daily basis as a programmer. So I know I really skimped on the functions, but the lab for this week and the assignment this week are functions, so you're going to get plenty more content on that. And I'm not trying to make these any longer than I have to. For what it's worth, I am sorry for talking for 45 minutes, but this week we kind of have a lot of content and kind of had to do quite a few examples. Oh, here's an example of a function. I didn't get to this one. So here's a function called myfunc. It expects to be passed an integer, and it returns a string. My favorite number is whatever. So you call it here. I call something called myfunc. I pass it an int. It's expecting an int. That int is going to get placed right there. Another point about functions is when you are defining a function, you call this a parameter. When you are calling a function, you call it an argument. Weird, right? Two things that reference the same thing, but the context gives them a different name. If you find that to be confusing, it is. So when you're defining a function, we call them parameters. When you're calling a function, you call them arguments. And these things have to match up. When I'm defining my parameters for functions in PHP, I generally, like I could have called that favorite or number or a lot of things. I generally call the variable the data type I'm expecting. Now, something I didn't get into today, and it's something like I said, I'm going to talk about functions a lot more this week. It's important that you document your functions. So when I say document your functions, you should, generally speaking, in a comment, say what the function does, explain what the parameter type you're expecting is, and explain the return value. That would be minimum documentation for a function. I'll try and do that when we do the lab this week, but I also knew that this was going to be a long presentation, so I was like, oh gosh, I think I'll just kind of blow over it and kind of lean on the fact that I know that you learned about functions in Introduction to Programming and a little bit in PHP and probably JavaScript, so I'm just going to kind of leave it at the basic syntax. So thanks for watching. In the future, I will try and be as concise as I can with these, but sometimes they're going to be long like this. So thanks for watching.